Understanding Putin and the Russia-Europe War, a series. In the power games of the Kremlin, Ramzan Kadyrov is undoubtedly the most extreme figure. For 20 years, Kadyrov has repeatedly and publicly declared his willingness to die for Putin, always playing the role of Putin's most loyal and fiercest enforcer. However, behind this showy display of fervent loyalty, an undercurrent of suspicion has always lingered. Many are willing to believe that Kadyrov, a powerful local strongman with absolute authority in Chechnya, who controls a well-equipped private army loyal only to him and whose words and actions often fall outside Russian federal law, is a modern-day Anlushan, a warlord, fed and nurtured by Putin himself, who now lords over his own territory. Yet the truth is, as long as Putin is alive, Kadyrov wouldn't dare rebel, regardless of who else might. That's because this fierce watchdog, personally tamed and raised by Putin, derives almost all his power from Putin's personal prestige. Kadyrov isn't an Anlushan waiting for an opportunity to revolt. He's a Jinshi guard, unable to survive without Putin. As the soul of modern Russia, Putin's story is a long journey that would take dozens of episodes to tell. Staring at screens for too long can make your eyes dry and tired. Why not try a different approach? Turn off the screen and let your ears listen to the story. Click on the soda music icon in the bottom left corner of the video to instantly switch to pure audio mode and listen to the program directly. The story continues even with the screen locked, and you can set a timer for it to turn off, which is really convenient. Listen through to understand the fundamental reasons for young Kadyrov's fervent support for Putin. To understand why young Kadyrov lacks the courage to rebel, we need to start with his father, Akhmat Kadyrov. From Russia's perspective, Akhmat Kadyrov was a great hero who helped Moscow pacify Chechnya. But in the eyes of Chechen separatists, old Kadyrov was Chechnya's biggest traitor, Chechnya's Wang Jingwei. The key to old Kadyrov's later ability to fundamentally change Chechnya lies in the fact that he was one of the core figures in the Chechen separatist movement. During the First Chechen War, old Kadyrov served as the chief Islamic judge of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. As a religious leader, he openly declared holy war against Russia, calling on Chechens to take up arms and fight the invaders for independence and faith. A newly adult young Kadyrov also participated in battles against the Russian army as his father's assistant and bodyguard. The First Chechen War ultimately ended with Moscow's compromise. However, the war brought Chechnya not only de facto independence, but also the intervention of external forces. With financial support from countries like Saudi Arabia, a more radical wave of Islamic fundamentalism rapidly spread throughout Chechnya. Key figures in this movement include
Shamil Basayev, who later masterminded the Beslan hostage crisis, and Ibn al-Khattab, a peer of bin Laden. As the influence of these Middle Eastern-backed jihadists grew, old Kadyrov's stance gradually wavered. The faction these people believed in differed from his own, and their methods were more extreme. If things continued this way, not only might Moscow decide to completely eradicate the Chechen separatists, but these jihadists were already beginning to seize his leadership in Chechnya. If these individuals continued to gain ground, he would inevitably be marginalized within Chechnya. Therefore, when 1999 arrived, old Kadyrov made a sensible decision. He decided to turn his gun and side with Moscow, striking hard against the Chechen separatists. Old Kadyrov's defection not only significantly reduced the difficulty of operations for the Russian army in the Second Chechen War, but also fundamentally lowered Moscow's cost of dealing with the Chechen problem. Old Kadyrov and his followers provided the Russian army with a long-sought-after intelligence network within Chechnya. Once the Chechen War transformed from a rebellion into a civil war among Chechens, Russia was virtually in an unbeatable position. At the same time, as Chechnya's highest religious figure, a respected former jihadist leader publicly siding with Moscow dealt a devastating blow to the legitimacy of the Chechen separatist movement. Old Kadyrov's choice ultimately became a crucial step in Putin's path to power and earned him Moscow's trust and the highest authority in post-war Chechnya. However, the defeated extremists couldn't let such a traitor go. After 2000, Chechen extremists launched numerous terrorist attacks within Russia, while endlessly attempting to assassinate old Kadyrov himself. It's estimated that during his few years as Chechnya's top leader, there were at least a dozen assassination attempts against him. On May 9, 2004, the terrorists' revenge succeeded. Old Kadyrov was killed in a bomb attack during a Victory Day parade. Thousands of miles away, Putin received the news instantly. For him, it was an expected surprise. But the tricky question came next. After old Kadyrov's death, who exactly should be entrusted with power? In fact, Putin had long anticipated this inevitable tragedy. Within hours of old Kadyrov's death, he urgently met with the grieving young Kadyrov in the Kremlin. The core of this meeting was Putin's promise to ensure the transfer of the Kadyrov family's power to him. This decision was actually not as simple as it later appeared. For Putin, old Kadyrov's death was not only a challenge, but also an opportunity. Although Putin's Chechenization strategy heavily relied on old Kadyrov as the only proxy with sufficient prestige and power, at least legally, with old Kadyrov dead, Chechnya should logically become an ordinary region of the Russian Federation, rather than a state within a state.
However, Putin didn't risk a resurgence of Chechen independence by seizing the opportunity to consolidate power. He saw another, larger opportunity. Young Kadyrov was only 28 at the time. His prestige and methods were far inferior to his father's. If Putin fully supported young Kadyrov's rise to power, Chechnya would not only transform from a state within a state into, in some sense, Putin's private, directly administered territory, but young Kadyrov, who had a blood feud with Chechen terrorists, would also inevitably take the lead in eliminating separatist forces, greatly reducing the combat pressure on the Russian army. Therefore, Putin not only decided within hours to transfer the Chechen presidency to young Kadyrov, but also made a series of targeted legal amendments afterward. He personally installed young Kadyrov as Chechen president as soon as he turned 30. For young Kadyrov, Putin is not just the enabler of his power, but also its guarantor. Old Kadyrov was able to control Chechnya because he held the highest religious authority within a religiously cohesive Chechnya. But young Kadyrov lacked that prestige. In fact, the only reason young Kadyrov could firmly hold on to leadership in Chechnya was the massive financial aid from Putin. How much money has Putin's Kremlin spent to keep young Kadyrov well fed? The answer is not only a huge sum, but also a stunning proportion. Today, Chechnya is the region in the Russian Federation most dependent on the central budget. Over 85% of its annual budget consistently comes from gratuitous aid from Moscow. Chechnya's own tax revenue doesn't even cover a fraction of its expenditures. In terms of actual figures, between 2007 and 2015, Chechnya received a cumulative 539 billion rubles in aid from the federal budget. After 2015, the annual aid to Chechnya has remained above 100 billion rubles. Media estimates suggest that since young Kadyrov took office, the Kremlin has paid over $20 billion in stability maintenance costs to Chechnya. Young Kadyrov plays the role of distributing this money. He not only pays higher salaries to Chechen bureaucrats and undertakes large-scale infrastructure projects, but also frequently provides bonuses and benefits to the soldiers of the Kadyrovsi. Young Kadyrov's prestige in Chechnya is entirely built on Moscow's financial aid. Therefore, he neither has the capital nor the motivation to defy Putin. The only thing young Kadyrov wants to do is pledge loyalty to Putin in exchange for more financial aid. Looking at the facts, Putin's investment has paid off handsomely. Young Kadyrov's loyalty to Putin has become almost sickeningly excessive. Verbally, young Kadyrov defines himself as Putin's foot soldier. He has repeatedly made statements like, "As long as Putin is there, Russia is there." Without Putin, there is no Russia and there is no Chechnya. He even openly declared his life's goal is to die protecting Putin. Furthermore, on his private social media accounts, whenever he meets Putin, young Kadyrov feels compelled to post a dozen messages proving his close relationship with Putin. This contrived flattery is why many doubt his motives. However, in his actions, young Kadyrov has indeed fulfilled his promises. As a powerful independent armed force, young Kadyrov's army has done countless dirty and arduous jobs for Putin. In 2015, Putin's political opponent Boris Nemtsov was assassinated in Moscow. Investigations revealed an undeniable connection between the killers and Chechen militants. Furthermore, the deaths of several Chechen separatists, including Sulim Yamadayev, are linked to young Kadyrov. In Russia's foreign military interventions, Kadyrov has long served as a vanguard figure. During the 2008 Georgian War, Kadyrov dispatched the East and West battalions, commanded by his trusted associates, to participate. During the Donbass crisis, large numbers of Chechen militants joined pro-Russian militia organizations. At the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, young Kadyrov even personally led his entire army to the front lines for photo ops. However, from a broader perspective, even if young Kadyrov maximizes his efforts to survive, he can only ensure that he isn't sacrificed by Putin. He cannot guarantee that his power will be passed down to his descendants. That's because, for present-day Russia, fundamental changes in its economic structure have made the cost-effectiveness of maintaining stability in Chechnya increasingly low. Why is this so? The next episode, focusing on the petro-ruble, will provide the answer.